First contact was a sterile, meticulously planned affair. When the human exploration vessel Unity met the lead ship of the Galactic Compact, the Stellar Harmony, in the neutral territory of the Oort cloud, every protocol was followed to the letter. Humanity, after centuries of dreaming, had finally met its galactic neighbors. The initial exchanges were a series of remote scans, data packets, and translated greetings, all conducted with a cool, professional distance. Then came the invitation for a face-to-face meeting aboard the Stellar Harmony. Captain Eva Rostova and her chief science officer, Dr. Ben Carter, were honored. They went through the Compact's prescribed decontamination procedures, a process of sonic sterilization and particle baths that was far more rigorous than their own. Dressed in formal uniforms, they walked across the shimmering energy bridge that connected the two ships, stepping onto the pristine, bone-white deck of the alien vessel. They were greeted by the Compact's lead diplomat, a being known as the Luminary. It was a tall, elegant creature of pure, coherent light, its form contained within a crystalline, vaguely humanoid shell. Its voice was a series of gentle, harmonious chimes. "Welcome, humans of Earth," the Luminary projected. "It is a moment of great significance. We have much to learn from one another." As the initial pleasantries were exchanged, a team of Compact biotechnicians conducted the final, close-range scans. It was a formality, a final check for any contaminants that might have slipped through the decontamination field. A smaller, floating crystalline drone hummed quietly as it circled the two humans. For a moment, all was serene. Then the drone began to emit a series of frantic, discordant chirps. Red lights flashed across its smooth surface. The Luminary paused, its form flickering with confusion. "A moment," it projected. "There appears to be a malfunction in our bioscanner." A technician, a thin insectoid being, skittered forward, tapping at a data slate. Its antennae twitched frantically. "Luminary, the scanner is not malfunctioning," it chittered. "The readings, they are impossible. The subjects are contaminated, severely." Captain Rostova stiffened. "Contaminated? We just passed through your highest-level decontamination field." "The field was successful," the technician replied, its voice trembling. "The contamination, it is coming from inside them." The Luminary's form pulsed with a sudden, sharp violet light, the color of alarm. It extended a crystalline finger, and a holographic display appeared in the air between them. It showed a magnified scan of Dr. Carter's own body. It was a horrifying, seething ecosystem. The display highlighted trillions upon trillions of microscopic entities. A chaotic swarm of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and archaea that coated every surface, filled every cavity, and swam in a dense, roiling soup within his digestive tract. "By the first principles," the Luminary chimed, its harmonious voice now tight with revulsion, "you are not a single organism. You are a walking plague, a legion of countless, competing life forms in a shell of flesh." Dr. Carter, a biologist, opened his mouth to explain the concept of a microbiome, of symbiosis, of the delicate and essential balance of life that he carried within him. But it was too late. The word plague had been spoken. Red alert sirens blared through the pristine halls of the Stellar Harmony. Heavy blast doors slammed shut. The friendly, welcoming atmosphere had vanished, replaced by one of cold clinical terror. "Quarantine protocol is now in effect," the Luminary projected, its form already receding behind a shimmering quarantine field. "Humanity of Earth, your application to the Galactic Compact is hereby suspended. You are designated a Level 7 biohazard. You are unclean." The diplomatic fallout was catastrophic. Humanity, on the cusp of joining a peaceful, enlightened galactic community, was reclassified overnight as a pariah species. Earth and its colonies were placed under a strict, system-wide quarantine, a hygienic cordon established by the Galactic Compact to protect its sterile member worlds from the teeming, chaotic biology of the humans. For 50 years, humanity was isolated, its ships confined to the Sol system. The initial shock and outrage gave way to a long, bitter period of resentment. The dream of the stars had been given, then snatched away, not because of any aggression or malice, but because the very nature of human life was considered fundamentally unclean by the galaxy's standards. Dr. Ben Carter, the man whose gut flora had terrified an entire galactic civilization, became the unwilling symbol of this isolation. He dedicated the rest of his long life to studying the human microbiome, the very thing that had made his species outcasts. He and his daughter, Dr. Aris Thorne, founded the Thorne Institute for Symbiotic Studies, a research organization that delved into the deepest secrets of humanity's inner ecosystem. They learned that the microbiome was not just a collection of passive passengers. It was a dynamic, hyper-adaptive extension of the human body. It influenced everything from mood and immunity to cognitive function. It was, in essence, a second, faster-evolving genome. Aris grew up in the shadow of the quarantine, raised on stories of the stars she could never visit. She inherited her father's passion, becoming a brilliant microbiologist and bacteriophage specialist. She saw the microbiome not as a source of shame, but as humanity's greatest, most misunderstood strength. While the rest of humanity looked to the stars with bitterness, Aris looked inward, into the teeming, chaotic universe within every human being. The news, when it came, was a distorted whisper through the quarantine wall, a series of fragmented data packets allowed through on compassionate grounds. A plague was sweeping through the Galactic Compact. It was a novel, silicon-based virus, crystalline in structure, that the Compact's sterile, monolithic biology had no defense against. It was dubbed the Crystal Scourge. The virus was terrifyingly effective. It didn't kill its hosts. It converted them. It rewrote their genetic code, slowly transforming organic beings into inert, crystalline statues. It was a disease of living petrification. The Compact's advanced medicine was useless. The Scourge adapted faster than they could develop antivirals. Entire worlds were falling silent, their populations transformed into vast, beautiful, and lifeless crystal forests. The sterile, clean galaxy was being sterilized for good. Aris Thorne read the reports in her lab on Luna, a deep, cold fury building in her chest. They had called humanity a plague. Now a real one was consuming them, and they were too proud and too disgusted to ask for help from the very species that had been dealing with plagues for its entire, messy history. Aris Thorne did not wait for an invitation. For years, the Thorne Institute had been working on a secret project, the Helminth, a long-range medical research vessel capable of running a single, high-speed breach of the quarantine blockade. It was a one-way trip. Using every favor and back channel she had, she assembled a small dedicated crew of microbiologists and geneticists. Her plan was not just to offer help. It was to prove that what the galaxy saw as humanity's greatest flaw was, in fact, its greatest strength. The Helminth's journey was a tense, desperate gamble. They slipped past the automated quarantine buoys and navigated the patrol routes of the Compact fleet. They were a tiny, insignificant ship on a mission of galactic importance. They set a course for the Cygnus system, one of the hardest hit by the Crystal Scourge, a system whose primary planet was home to a species of gentle, silicon-based scholars. They arrived to a scene of silent crystalline horror. A fleet of beautiful crystalline Cygnian ships hung in orbit, their crews now part of their own crystalline structures. On the planet below, entire cities had been transformed into vast, glittering sculptures. But there were still signs of life. A single medical station in high orbit was still broadcasting a distress signal. That was their destination. The Cygnians on the station were terrified when the unclean human ship requested permission to dock. But they were also dying. The station's chief medical officer, a being named Prelate Vex, its form already showing the first faint signs of crystalline conversion, reluctantly granted them access. He had nothing left to lose. Aris and her team, clad in full biohazard suits, entered the Cygnian medical station. It was a pristine, sterile environment, but the air hummed with the quiet terror of a losing battle. Vex showed them his data. He showed them the crystalline virus, its beautiful, terrible fractal patterns. He showed them his failed antiviral treatments, his logical, elegant solutions that the virus had simply shrugged off. Aris looked at his data, then at her own team. "Prelate," she said, her voice calm and steady through her suit's speaker. "You have been trying to kill the virus with a single, perfect weapon. That is not how you fight a plague. A plague is an ecosystem. You do not kill an ecosystem. You introduce a predator." She held up a small, sealed vial. Inside was a swirling, cloudy liquid. "You are a sterile species. Your bodies are a clean room. Our bodies," she said with a fierce pride, "are a battlefield. And on that battlefield for millions of years, our microbiome has been at war. It has developed a weapon you have no concept of." She placed the vial on the table. "This is a sample of my own gut flora, and within it are 1 trillion bacteriophages, viruses that hunt viruses. You've been fighting a war with soldiers. We are about to introduce your enemy to an entire self-replicating army of assassins. Prelate Vex was horrified and fascinated in equal measure. The human proposal was a violation of every principle of sterile, logical Signian medicine. To introduce a new unknown biological agent, a swarm of countless chaotic organisms, into a patient's system was an act of profound recklessness. It was like trying to put out a fire by starting a second, larger fire. Your bacteriophages, they are viruses themselves, Vex projected, its energy field flickering with doubt. How can you be certain they will not harm the host? How do you control them? We don't control them, not directly, Aris explained, projecting a holographic display of a bacteriophage attacking a virus. We guide them. We are not just giving you the predators. We are giving you the training manual. My team will analyze the genetic structure of the crystal Scourge. We will then take a phage from our own microbiome, one that targets silicon-based structures, and we will use our own viral DNA to teach it how to recognize your plague. We are not designing a cure from scratch. We are training a hunting dog. The concept was alien. Signian medicine was about absolutes, about designing a single, perfect molecule to neutralize a single, specific threat. The human approach was messy, adaptive, and based on the idea of turning one part of nature against another. It was biological warfare on a microscopic scale. With time running out and the crystalline conversion on its own body accelerating, Vex gave its assent. Aris and her team got to work. They took samples of the crystal Scourge and brought them back to the Helminth's advanced biolab. What would have taken the Signians years of methodical research, the humans treated like a frantic, high-stakes puzzle. They introduced the Scourge to thousands of different human bacteriophages, watching for any sign of interaction. It was a process of rapid, brute force trial and error. Finally, they found it. A phage that had evolved in the gut of a human who had lived near Earth's silicon mines. A phage that had a natural, if weak, affinity for binding with crystalline structures. This was their candidate. Now came the art. Aris and her geneticists began the delicate process of modifying the phage. They spliced in genetic markers from other human viruses, teaching it to replicate faster, to target the Scourge's specific fractal signature, and most importantly, to self-terminate once its food source, the Scourge, was eliminated. They weren't just creating a killer, they were creating a killer with an off switch. After 2 days of frantic, non-stop work, they had it. A new bespoke bacteriophage born from the chaos of a human gut, trained to hunt a crystalline plague. They had created a living, self-replicating cure. They brought the first dose to Prelate Vex. The Signian looked at the vial of cloudy, teeming liquid, a universe of chaotic life about to be introduced into its pure, sterile system. It was a leap of faith into the heart of the very biological anarchy it had feared for its entire existence. The quarantine. We established it because we saw your biology as a threat. Vex projected, its voice a weak hum. We saw chaos. We never considered that the chaos was a strength. Life is messy, Prelate, Aris said softly, holding out the vial. Sometimes to survive the storm you have to invite the hurricane inside. Vex took the vial. It was the first time in 50 years that the two civilizations had truly exchanged anything. It was not a treaty or a greeting. It was a cure, born from a plague offered as a gift. The injection was a profound violation. For Prelate Vex, a being whose entire existence was defined by a sterile crystalline purity, the infusion of the cloudy, teeming liquid from the human biolab was an act of ultimate surrender. Its internal sensors, calibrated to detect a single misplaced molecule, screamed in protest as 1 trillion foreign organisms flooded its system. It was not a cure. It was an invasion. Vex's crystalline form shuddered violently, its internal light flickering like a dying star. From its perspective, it was being consumed from within. The human bacteriophages, a chaotic swarm of life, began their work with a brutal, single-minded efficiency that terrified the logical Signian. It could feel them swarming, replicating, fighting. The clean, quiet sanctuary of its own body had become a raging, microscopic battlefield. On the bridge of the Helminth, Aris Thorne and her team watched the data streams with grim, unwavering focus. Vex's biosigns were critical. Its internal temperature was fluctuating wildly, and its energy output was erratic. The biological chaos they had unleashed was pushing the Signian system to the breaking point. His homeostatic regulators are failing, one of her team reported, his voice tight. The sheer bioload is overwhelming him. Hold steady, Aris commanded, her eyes never leaving the microscopic view of the battle. Look, she pointed to a specific data feed. The population of the crystal scourge, which had been replicating exponentially, had suddenly hit a wall. The custom-trained phages, now an army trillion strong, had found their prey. It was a slaughter. The scourge, a virus that had evolved in a sterile galaxy, had never encountered a natural predator. It had no defenses, no evasive maneuvers. The phages latched onto its crystalline structure, injected their own code, and forced the scourge to replicate its own executioners. Just as Vex's system seemed on the verge of total collapse, the tide turned. The scourge population plummeted. The phages, their only food source now gone, began to die off, their engineered self-termination sequence kicking in. The raging internal storm subsided as quickly as it had begun. The chaos receded, leaving behind a profound, clean silence. Prelate Vex's form stabilized. Its internal light, once flickering, now glowed with a soft, steady brilliance. On the bioscanner, they saw the impossible. The crystalline lesions that had been slowly consuming the Signian were not just halted. They were actively receding, being broken down and absorbed by Vex's own revitalized systems. The cure had worked. The fire had been put out by a controlled biological firestorm. Prelate Vex's recovery was a miracle that echoed through the silent, terrified corridors of the Galactic Compact. The Signian medical station, once a hospice of the damned, became a beacon of impossible hope. Vex, in a joint broadcast with Dr. Thorne, transmitted their findings to the entire compact, the data, the methodology, and the living proof of the cure. The reaction was a schism that split the galaxy in two. For worlds on the brink of total crystalline conversion, it was a lifeline, an answer to their prayers. Urgent, desperate requests for the human treatment flooded the comm channels. But for a significant portion of the compact, the cure was a horror almost as profound as the disease. The purist faction, a coalition of ancient dogmatic species who valued sterile purity above all else, was chief among the dissenters. Led by the imperious insectoid Cathar, they viewed the human solution as a contamination. The humans offer us a choice between a clean death and a filthy life, the Cathar ambassador broadcast from their pristine homeworld. They would have us save our bodies by sacrificing the purity of our very essence. To accept their cure is to become like them, a chaotic, unclean ecosystem. We would rather embrace a crystalline end than endure such a biological heresy. Aris Thorne was now faced with a war on two fronts. She was in a race against time to produce enough of the phage treatment for the worlds that wanted it, while simultaneously fighting a political and philosophical battle against the purists, who would rather see the galaxy turn to stone than accept a messy, biological truth. The Helminth's biolabs ran 24 hours a day, its small team working to the point of exhaustion. They were a tiny, isolated island of life, desperately trying to culture a cure for a galaxy that was tearing itself apart over whether that cure was too disgusting to contemplate. The irony was a bitter pill. The masters of sterile technology were dying because they had forgotten the simple, messy, and brutally effective art of biology. The purists, unwilling to allow the human contamination to spread, made their move. A Cathar battlecruiser, the Immaculate, a vessel of terrifying sterile beauty, warped into the Cygnus system. Its message to the Helminth was direct and uncompromising. Unidentified human vessel, the Cathar captain's synthesized voice crackled over the comm. You are in violation of Galactic Compact Quarantine Protocol 1. Your biological experiments are a threat to the purity of this sector. Cease all operations. Surrender your biological materials for immediate incineration. Failure to comply will result in your sterilization. Aris stood on the bridge of her small, unarmed science ship, looking at the monolithic warship on her view screen. Surrender meant the end of the galaxy's only hope, but to fight was impossible. They had no weapons, no shields to speak of. Then an idea sparked in her mind, a concept born from the very symbiosis she had been studying. She opened a secure channel to the Signian medical station, to Prelate Vex. Prelate, she said, her voice urgent. The phage treatment. It didn't just save you. It changed you. Remnants of the phage DNA have integrated into your own genome. You are no longer just Signian, you are more. Vex, having studied its own post-recovery biology, understood immediately. The human symbionts. They left behind genetic echoes, tools. Exactly, Aris said. The purists believe in sterile, separate systems. We are going to show them the power of a cooperative one. I can teach you how to activate those genetic echoes. I can teach you how to form a symbiotic bond with your own medical station. It was a leap into a new form of existence. Aris transmitted a series of complex biorhythmic frequencies and genetic activation codes to the recovered Signians. She taught them how to extend their own consciousness, augmented by the human genetic remnants, into the station's core systems. They learned to feel the station's power conduits like their own circulatory system, its sensors like their own eyes. The pristine, sterile medical station, under the guidance of its newly symbiotic inhabitants, began to wake up. It was no longer just a place of healing. It was becoming a living entity. The first legion, a legion of two species united in a single, symbiotic purpose, was born. Aboard the Immaculate, the Cathar captain watched in confusion as the Signian medical station began to emit a strange, fluctuating energy signature. It was chaotic, organic, and utterly illogical. He dismissed it as a system malfunction on the dying station and gave the order to fire a warning shot, a precise beam of particle energy aimed at the Helminth's engines. The medical station responded. It did not fire a weapon. Instead, under the conscious will of Prelate Vex and the other survivors, it projected a targeted, dense cloud of rapidly multiplying organic algae from its waste recycling systems. The green, slimy cloud, a horror of biological filth to the Cathar, slammed into the side of the Immaculate, completely gumming up the warship's primary weapon port. The Cathar captain, disgusted and enraged, ordered his ship's secondary turrets to lock on, but the station's energy shields, once a stable, predictable bubble, were now fluctuating in chaotic, organic patterns. They pulsed and swirled like a living cell membrane, and the Cathar's advanced targeting computers, programmed for predictable geometric targets, could not achieve a lock. "Report," the captain shrieked at his technicians. "Sir, their shields are..." "Improvising," the weapons officer stammered. "The patterns are not logical. We cannot predict their energy distribution." The station then used its powerful communication array not to speak, but to broadcast a single low-frequency sonic resonance, a frequency Aris had identified as being deeply, physically unsettling to the Cathar's chitinous exoskeletons. The bridge of the Immaculate was filled with a deep, vibrating hum that made every insectoid crew member's carapace ache with a phantom pain. The Cathar warship, a pinnacle of sterile, logical military design, was being defeated by algae, a disco ball shield, and a bad headache. It was a form of warfare so alien, so messy, so fundamentally biological that they had no protocol for it. After a few minutes of fruitless, frustrating attempts to target the station, the captain, fearing further contamination from the biological attack, made the only logical decision. He ordered a retreat. As the Immaculate warped away, a new message began to spread through the Galactic Compact, this one from the Signians. It was a message of hope and a declaration of a new philosophy. They explained that the human cure did more than just heal the body. It introduced a new way of life. It taught the strength of symbiosis, the power of a messy, cooperative, and adaptive existence. Aris Thorne stood on the bridge of the Helminth, watching the living medical station pulse with a soft green light. She had not just brought a cure, she had brought a revolution, a seed of biological chaos that would either be the galaxy's salvation or tear it apart completely. The choice was no longer between a clean death and a filthy life. It was now between sterile logical extinction and a messy, symbiotic, and vibrant future. The victory of the living medical station over the Cathar warship was not just a military upset. It was a philosophical bombshell. The news broadcast by the Signians spread across the beleaguered Galactic Compact, carrying with it a radical and dangerous idea. The human contamination was not a disease, but an evolution. For the worlds ravaged by the crystal scourge, where entire populations were on the brink of petrification, this was a paradigm shift. Hope, a concept that had been dwindling for months, was reignited. A flotilla of the desperate began to arrive in the Cygnus system. They were civilian ships, medical transports, and private vessels from a dozen different species, all of whom had chosen to defy the purist doctrine. They came not as invaders, but as refugees, begging for the human cure. The quarantine, once a wall to keep humanity in, had become a prison preventing the galaxy from reaching its only salvation. The Helminth was too small to handle the influx. Aris Thorne and Prelate Vex made a decision. They would convert the entire medical station into a massive biofactory and a sanctuary. The growing number of cured Signians, now members of a nascent Symbiotic Legion, worked with the human team. They used their new innate connection to the station's systems to rapidly reconfigure labs, fabricate new culturing vats, and manage the logistics of the relief effort. The station was no longer just a sterile hospital. It was becoming a vibrant, chaotic, and living ark. The purists, led by the Cathar, watched this development with cold, insectoid fury. They did not see a humanitarian crisis being averted. They saw a heresy spreading. The human ideology of messy, symbiotic life was a contagion of thought, more dangerous than the crystal scourge itself. They declared the Cygnus system a bioheretical zone, a source of ultimate corruption. The schism in the Compact was no longer a debate. A Cathar-led fleet, a grand armada of sterile, white-hulled warships, was dispatched with a single, chilling objective: to enforce a true, military-grade quarantine and sterilize the source of the infection, starting with the human ship and its allies. The purest fleet that warped into the Cygnus system was a breathtaking and terrifying sight. Hundreds of pristine, identical warships arranged themselves in a perfect geometric formation, a wall of sterile, white anger against the blackness of space. Their message, broadcast on all channels, was the voice of absolute, unbending dogma. To the illegal occupants of this system, the Cathar Grand Admiral's voice intoned, devoid of all emotion: "You have fostered a biological corruption. You have violated the first principle of purity. You are a cancer. Surrender all biological materials for incineration. Surrender your vessels and your bodies for sterilization. You have one cycle. There will be no further communication." Aris Thorne stood on the bridge of the Helminth, watching the armada of righteous fury assemble. Her small fleet consisted of her unarmed science vessel, a single living medical station, and a few dozen civilian ships huddled behind it like frightened children. They could not run, and they could not win a conventional fight. Prelate Vex's consciousness, now intertwined with the station, projected a feeling of grim resolve. "They see life as a disease," it communicated to Aris. "How do you reason with those who worship death?" Aris looked at the data streams from the refugee ships, at the bioscans of the dying, and then at the perfect, unyielding formation of the purest fleet. They couldn't be reasoned with. But the Cathar, for all their dogma, were beings of logic. Their entire philosophy was built on a single, flawed premise: that they were pure. Aris realized she didn't have to defeat their fleet. She just had to defeat their argument. And she would do it with the most powerful weapon she had: the undeniable, messy truth of biology. "They believe they are sterile," Aris said to her team, a dangerous, brilliant idea taking shape in her mind. "They believe the Scourge is an external enemy they can keep out with walls and weapons. We're about to show them that the monster has been inside their house the entire time." The Symbiotic Legion's response to the purest fleet's advance was bizarre. As the first wave of Cathar destroyers moved forward, the Signian medical station launched a series of small, unarmed biocanisters. The Cathar, assuming them to be some form of the algae weapon used before, destroyed them with contemptuous ease, their point defense lasers vaporizing the canisters hundreds of kilometers away. The attack was pathetic, a meaningless gesture, but the canisters were a distraction. The real weapon, released in the flash of their destruction, was microscopic, airborne, and already sweeping through the purest fleet. It was a new bacteriophage, designed by Aris in the days since the first Cathar encounter. She called it the Trojan phage. This phage was harmless to organic life. It was programmed with a single, elegant, and devastating function: to seek out the unique silicon signature of the crystal scourge. But it was not designed to attack it. It was designed as a catalyst. When the Trojan phage found a dormant scourge particle, it triggered a simple, localized reaction, providing the particle with the energy it needed to begin its conversion process. On the pristine, white bridge of the Cathar flagship, a single frantic alarm began to chime. A technician shrieked, pointing a trembling claw at its console. A tiny, beautiful, and terrifying crystal bloom, no bigger than a grain of sand, was growing from the console's surface. Then another alarm went off. And another, all across the flagship and on every other ship in the purest fleet. The Scourge, which had been a dormant, microscopic presence picked up from simple interstellar dust, was waking up. Pinpricks of crystal began to appear on bulkheads, on weapons systems, and, in a wave of ultimate horror, on the chitinous carapaces of the Cathar crew themselves. Their sterility had been a lie. Their purity was an illusion. The plague was not outside their walls. It had been inside them all along, a silent passenger waiting for a key. As chaos and terror erupted throughout the purest fleet, a single calm message was broadcast from the helminth. It was Aris Thorne's voice. "Your enemy is not us," she said, her voice carrying across their panicked comm channels. "It is the plague that you have carried with you all along. Your sterile walls were never a shield. They were a prison, blinding you to the truth of a messy, interconnected universe. We are not your enemy. We are the cure. The choice is yours." The purest fleet was broken, not by weapons but by an undeniable truth. Their entire ideology, their crusade for a sterile galaxy, had been rendered meaningless by the simple fact of their own contamination. Faced with the immediate terrifying reality of the crystal scourge blooming from within their own bodies, the Cathar Grand Admiral did the only logical thing left to do. His voice stripped of all its former arrogance, he broadcast a single message in the clear: "We request the cure." The Great Purist War ended without a single shot being fired in anger. The human ship and its living station became a field hospital, administering the phage treatment to its former enemies, an act of mercy that shattered the last remnants of their dogma. In the years that followed, the human cure spread throughout the galaxy, but it became clear that the cure did more than simply stop the scourge. It changed every species it touched. The genetic echoes left behind by the human bacteriophages became a permanent part of their biology, a gift from humanity's chaotic ecosystem. Species that had been sterile and individualistic for eons discovered a new, latent ability to form symbiotic bonds, not just with each other but with their technology. The old, rigid Galactic Compact dissolved, replaced by a new, vibrant, and ever-evolving galactic symbiosis. Worlds that had been dying were reborn. Cities of metal and crystal learned to grow like forests. Ships learned to feel, to heal, to live. The galaxy, once a collection of isolated, sterile islands, was becoming a single, interconnected, and beautifully messy superorganism. Humanity, once the reviled, quarantined plague species, was now revered as the architects of this new age. They were not conquerors. They were gardeners. They had not brought war. They had brought life in all its chaotic, unpredictable, and symbiotic glory. Aris Thorne stood on the bridge of the helminth, looking at a new, dynamic map of the galaxy. It was a shimmering, interconnected web of life, constantly shifting and growing. Her father had been exiled because the galaxy saw the life within him as a threat. Now that same life was the galaxy's salvation. The ultimate HFY truth was now the foundation of a new galactic era. Humanity's uncleanliness, our inner chaos, our constant microscopic war in the blood, was not a flaw. It was the evolutionary leap that a sterile, dying galaxy had desperately needed to survive. Humanity hadn't just joined the galactic community. They had taught it how to truly live.